I held the knife so tightly my wrist throbbed, and for a few seconds, it felt like I was clinging to the only real thing in my life. The blade caught the overhead light, flickering near my reflection in the steel. I wasn't planning to use it on Amanda Jacobs Morgan, though part of me might have wanted to. No, that knife was for me. If the moment ever came when the pain drilling through my body finally outgrew my capacity to keep living with it, it was a thought I never thought I'd have. But I stood there, alone in the kitchen at 3 a.m, trembling with a physical ache in my gut and an emptiness I hadn't even realized I could feel. The clock on the wall behind me ticked loud enough to carve out each second with a razor's precision. Tick, my breath hitching in my throat. Tick, my pulse hammering in my ears. Tick, I felt the sting of tears, but nothing fell. My eyes were too dry or too proud. The hum of the refrigerator and the stale light of the bare bulb overhead gave the entire room a sickly yellow hue. Each exhale tasted sour. After a minute, I set the knife down on the counter, my knuckles stiff from gripping the handle too hard. I'm Christopher Morgan. I'm 41 years old, used to be proud of the name Chris, but now I keep hearing it echoing in my own head like it belongs to someone else. A stranger, maybe. Because the man I've become, I barely recognize him. This is the story of how, in the span of a year, I discovered everything I'd built was a lie, and how I decided to keep going, no matter what the cost. I think it really began, 7 years ago, the first time my wife said she wanted to run a marathon. Even then, the cracks in our marriage were small enough for me to ignore. I remember the day she came home with that triumphant grin after crossing the finish line. Amanda Jacobs Morgan, sweaty and flushed, wearing her medal around her neck. She had that mixture of pride and adrenaline that told me she'd found something new and thrilling. But it wasn't just her running that changed that day. There was also the lingering smell of someone else's sweat clinging to her shirt. I caught it, as unmistakable as if it were scrawled in red ink across her chest. I didn't say a word. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to bury it. To bury everything. And that was my first mistake. I started drawing skulls in a crumpled old notebook that same night, one for each day that I stayed silent. Drawing used to be my passion, a dream that ended up rerouted into a more practical job as a graphic designer to pay bills. But I found a strange solace in those grim sketches, each one a different shape, a different expression of death. Quiet, lonely, ominous. I never showed them to Amanda. I never meant to. They were my secret, my way of screaming on paper while my mouth stayed shut. 7 years of denial is a long time. If you asked me why I endured it, I wouldn't have a simple answer. Maybe I was too loyal, too afraid, or too trapped in my own mind to confront the obvious. So I let the daily routine swallow my doubts. We had a house in Phoenix. I had a steady job. We had a child. Only, as I'd soon learn, not my child. I didn't suspect at first. I just watched the way she'd slip into the shower at odd hours, the hush of her voice late at night on the phone. Saw the marathon medals line up on her dresser. Half marathons, 10Ks, full runs. Another sign of how she was always racing away from me. And then, one morning, I got a text from my nephew. A meme. A stupid meme, or so I thought at first. It showed a guy holding 2 wedding rings with a caption, "When you don't know you're not the only one." It made me smirk wryly. Dark humor was my coping mechanism. I was going to forget it, but the truth was, I couldn't. Something about that meme sunk into my skin like a barbed hook. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was aimed right at me. A cosmic joke, or a cosmic warning. That evening, a plain white envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. The DNA test result. I'd submitted it weeks earlier, a pit in my stomach telling me I might regret it. And I did, because in the line that read paternity, there was a single word. Excluded. My knees almost buckled. For a moment, I literally couldn't breathe. Blood pounded in my temples, like the walls of the house were collapsing in on me. I slid down to the floor, leaning my head against the fridge. It was cold against my skull, giving a jolt that snapped me out of my haze, as if confirming everything. The kettle on the stove chose that moment to start boiling, hissing steam and squealing like an alarm. It was like the house itself was trying to tell me, "This is it. The moment you can't go back." I remember I laughed. Soft, almost hysterical, like I was on the verge of tears but refusing to let them out. "Well, Chris," I said to myself, "you really are the only idiot in this story, huh?" Then I shut my eyes, just for a second, letting the bitterness soak in. When I opened them, I saw one of my half-finished skull sketches on the kitchen table, lines still wet. It stared back at me with hollow eyes, as though mocking my gullibility. So I picked it up, flipped to a blank page, and started scribbling a new skull, a big one that took up the entire sheet. Every pencil stroke was an exhalation, every shading a place to bury the fury that was threatening to boil over. Because, see, I'd become an expert at swallowing rage. But the more I tried to hold it in, the more it manifested as this physical pain, like a knot in my chest, twisting and pressing. By the end of that night, my left shoulder felt like it was on fire. Over the next few days, I collected clues like a detective building a case. I watched Amanda Jacobs Morgan, listened in on her phone calls whenever she crept into the hallway thinking I was asleep, tracked the little shifts in her demeanor, the way her lips twitched into a private grin I'd never been able to inspire for years, the sudden text messages she answered with a flush. I scribbled down her phrases, her laughter in the shower. Because despite the heartbreak, I still needed proof. Maybe because I was still clinging to a shred of hope that it was some bizarre mistake. Or maybe I wanted to see her squirm when I finally confronted her. I don't know. But I documented everything, focusing through the lens of pure, cold logic, ignoring the actual magma of hurt coursing through my veins. In the evenings, we barely spoke. I'd stay up sketching or reading. She'd retreat to our bedroom to watch TV. Sometimes I could hear her giggle, the same laugh that once soothed me when we were younger. Now it just sounded false, like a stranger's voice in the next room. My body started protesting, muscles tensing to the point of spasm, headaches that felt like nails driven into my temples. I woke up with my jaw clenched so tight, I was sure I'd crack a tooth, but I refused to let out a single cry of pain around her. Silence had become my armor. I'd let that speak louder than any confrontation. Amanda must have sensed something. She'd shoot me wary glances across the kitchen, as if she expected an explosion, but I never gave her the satisfaction. I just lift my coffee mug to my lips and look away. I didn't yell or toss her clothes onto the lawn. I didn't do anything dramatic on the outside, because inside, I was a goddamn battlefield. It took me a month of collecting evidence to pinpoint the man she was seeing. Eric Donovan, a sales manager from out of town, newly moved to Phoenix. I found receipts from a sporting goods store, cross-referenced her phone logs, and discovered repeated calls to the same unknown number. One night, while she was in the shower, I snuck her phone from her gym bag. My stomach churned as I scrolled through her messages. My head started throbbing. There it was. Explicit evidence, an exchange of texts that left no doubt about the affair. I'll spare you the word for word, but it was enough to leave my hands shaking with rage and betrayal, and it stung twice as hard because she was pregnant around the time some of these messages were sent. The child who was supposed to be mine was his. I confronted her in the kitchen the next day. I'd waited until the moment I knew her routine was pinned down. She'd come home from a meeting, deposit her keys on the counter, pull off her running shoes, and head for the fridge. At the exact second she twisted the cap off a water bottle, I slammed a folder full of printouts onto the table. She jumped, water splashing onto her wrist. "What's that?" Her eyes darted to the folder, to me, and back again. "Open it. Amanda Jacobs," I said. I deliberately used her maiden name because it cut her like a whip. I'd never done that in all our marriage. "Go on." She set the water bottle down with trembling fingers, flipped open the folder. Saw the phone records, the hotel bills, the text transcripts. For a split second, her face went blank. Then her lip curled into a practiced mask of confusion. What is all this? I folded my arms, let my silence speak. She paused, realized I wasn't buying a single protestation. Her eyes flicked back to the printouts. Something in her deflated. Okay, she whispered. Chris, I can explain. Explain what? My voice was tight, carefully controlled, like a detective cornering a suspect. That you slept with Eric Donovan while I was at work. That you met up with him after your runs. That you let me believe, for years, that our son was mine. Is that what you want to explain? She swallowed hard. I noticed the clock ticking. The coffee machine gurgled. Her eyelashes fluttered once, twice, as if she might faint, and I swore I could feel this phantom dagger twisting between my ribs. I waited, giving her all the rope she needed to hang herself with some pathetic excuse or half-truth. But she just stood there, tears welling in her eyes. There was no apology. She simply said, I'm sorry, but with such hollowness I wanted to smash something. Don't apologize, I said, stepping back. Not right now. Not unless you want to lie even more. Amanda stared at me, her fingers curling into fists, then unclenching. Finally, she let out a tremulous breath. Do you want me to leave? That question caught me off guard, because logically, I should have screamed yes, shoved her out the door. Instead, I shook my head. No, leaving would be too easy for you, Amanda Jacobs. I'm not done. I watched confusion flicker in her gaze, then a spark of defiance. She grabbed her phone and retreated to the bedroom without another word. The door slammed. I stood in the silence, my body shaking so violently I had to sit down. My chest felt like a stone pressing down on it. My breath came in ragged gulps. The idea of picking up that knife returned, not to kill her, but to slice out the rotting piece of me that still loved her, because it hurt in ways I didn't even know were possible, like every nerve in my body was on fire. Over the next few weeks, we lived in a tense stalemate. I slept on the couch. She avoided me except when necessary. Some nights I'd hear her on the phone, voice hushed, speaking to him. Sometimes I'd walk past the bedroom door and catch phrases like, no, I can't talk right now, or he's still awake. I cataloged them all, each phrase another skull in my mental gallery. I began to see those skulls when I closed my eyes. No color, no flesh, just the empty grins of the dead, mocking me for my weakness. One night, my nephew sent me another meme. Something about a DNA test, ironically. I glared at my phone, half expecting the device to melt from the intensity of my rage. It wasn't my nephew's fault, though. He was just sending me random jokes. But it reminded me how upside down everything had become. My wife, a woman I'd cherished, was secretly building a life with Eric Donovan in the cracks of our own marriage. And me, I was turning into a man I barely recognized, silent, calculating, hurting so badly that I found it easier to fantasize about slicing a blade across my own skin just to release the pressure. One evening, the house phone rang. No one ever used the landline except telemarketers and my parents. I picked it up. A woman asked for me by name, sounding official. Turned out to be a follow-up from the DNA lab, checking if I'd received my results, and if everything was satisfactory. My throat closed up. I spat out some curt answer and slammed the phone down. Then I looked up to see Amanda standing in the doorway, eyes wide, her lips parted like she was about to say something. But I just walked past her, didn't give her a chance, didn't want to hear whatever twisted justification she had on her tongue. Days turned into weeks. The tension became so thick that the lights in our living room flickered constantly, like they were also suffocating from the pressure. Once, I replaced the bulb, and it flickered again, and I found myself cursing it under my breath. Small details like that, you never forget them when your life is unraveling. The drip of the faucet, the ticking of the clock, the hiss of the kettle. They become signposts reminding you that the world's still moving, even though your own universe is stuck in a slow-motion implosion. And then one afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing the latest skull in my battered notebook, when she emerged from the bedroom. She had her phone in her hand, tears streaking her cheeks. My heart lurched. She looked younger, somehow, like the woman I'd married, fearful and desperate. "Eric's gone," she croaked. "He's married now. He doesn't want me anymore." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, sobbing softly. "Chris, I can't do this. Please, I'm begging you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stared at her, feeling no pity, just a dull ache in my shoulder. I closed my notebook. "Amanda Jacobs," I said calmly. "I told you before, don't apologize unless you mean it." She inhaled sharply, chest heaving. "I do mean it. I messed up. I know that. I didn't." Her words stumbled out. "I didn't think it would go on this long. I never wanted to hurt you like this." "But you did," I said, standing up slowly. The pain in my back flared, but I refused to show it. Over and over again. She buried her face in her hands, her hair falling like a curtain. For a moment, I felt the faintest flicker of compassion. Maybe because she looked so small. Or maybe because I was exhausted from this twisted game. But I stood there, silent, letting her sobs fill the room. The kettle started boiling. Again, that damned timing. Steam whistled from the spout, punctuating her cries. Eventually, I turned off the stove, and as the shrieking died away, I knelt beside her, gently pulled her hands away from her face. Her eyes were red and puffy. "I wrote something, months ago," I whispered, reaching for the folded paper in my notebook. "My vow. I'd scrawled it one night after I discovered the extent of her affair. Do you want to know what it says?" She nodded mutely. I opened the paper. The words were shaky, like I'd carved them out in anguish. "I will not allow a second person in my marriage again. Never." I looked at her, my breath hitching. "You broke us, Amanda Jacobs. But I'm not leaving. You are." She stared, stunned, as if the concept had never crossed her mind. Then something dark flickered in her eyes. "No, Chris. We can fix this." "No," I said, voice hoarse. "I won't share you. I won't pretend. And I sure as hell won't be a father to a child you had with some other man. Enough. Go be with Eric Donovan if you want. But not here." She gave a strangled cry, lurching forward to grab my shirt. "He's gone, Chris. He left me. You're all I have." I pulled her fingers away, carefully but firmly. The pain in my chest was real, throbbing, but it wasn't enough to break me now. "Should have thought of that before," I said. My voice was so low I barely recognized it. "I don't hate you, but I can't be this man any longer." We stared at each other in silence. Then I rose. Her tears splashed onto the tile floor as she sank against a chair, trembling. It was the final push I needed. The final proof that she was choking in her own regrets, but that was no longer my concern. I turned away, walked into our bedroom. My bedroom, now, and grabbed a suitcase from the closet. Started tossing her clothes into it, haphazardly. She staggered in, face streaked with tears. "Don't do this," she rasped. "Please, I don't have anywhere else. Not my problem," I muttered. "Pack up. Leave. You've had a second life with Eric Donovan for years. Figure out where you'll go next." She sank to her knees, sobbing, trying to plead with me. But every word she said was an echo of the betrayal. I stepped over her, feeling an ache in my shoulders, in my ribs, everywhere. But my mind was set. Time had erased so much of our happiness already. Now it was erasing what little remained of my willingness to endure her presence. The more she cried, the more resolute I became. Once the suitcase was packed, I zipped it shut with a final jerk. The sound was so loud in the quiet house, like the door of a prison cell slamming. Without a word, I left it by the front door. She eventually crawled to her feet, arms shaking, and stumbled over to me. For a moment, I felt sure she'd strike me, or cling to me, or do something dramatic. but all she did was whisper, "Chris, I can't breathe without you." I stared at her. "Maybe you should have remembered that before you gave yourself to another man." My words felt like shards of glass in my mouth. "Get out." She hesitated, lips parted, searching my face for any sign of mercy. Finding none, she pressed her eyes shut, tears forcing their way down her cheeks. Finally, she walked out the door, dragging the suitcase behind her. The wheels bumped awkwardly on the threshold. I didn't help. I just watched as she stepped outside, blinking in the harsh sunlight, a broken figure with nowhere to go. She glanced back once, as though hoping for some miracle. I met her gaze with cold silence. Then I shut the door, felt it click. It was the quietest, yet loudest, moment of my life. For a long time, I leaned against the door, heart hammering, sweat trickling down my face. My body ached like I'd gone 10 rounds in a boxing ring. I listened for a car engine or footsteps, but all I heard was the soft whir of the air conditioner kicking in. The emptiness inside me was both liberating and terrifying. Because now that she was gone, I realized just how badly I'd been clinging to an illusion. I slowly walked into the kitchen, the place where I'd confronted her so many times in my head, and only once in reality. The kettle sat on the stove, silent. The clock continued its metronomic ticking, never slowing, never speeding up. Each second felt heavier than the last. I sank into a chair, rubbing my temples. I thought about calling someone, my sister, maybe, or an old friend, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. How do you explain this kind of betrayal in a phone call? Instead, I opened my notebook, tore out every single page with a skull on it. It was time to exorcise those ghosts. I stacked them into a neat pile in the sink and lit a match. The flames licked the edges, turning them black, smoke curling upward. A faint smell of scorched paper filled the air. I watched my silent screams go up in smoke. Maybe it was symbolic, or maybe I just couldn't stand to see them anymore. When the last corner burned out, I opened the window and let the smoke dissipate. My eyes stung, but I couldn't tell if it was from the smoke or from the sob I kept shoving down into my gut. I was free. I was alone. And I was in agony. That vow I wrote. I will not allow a second person in my marriage again. It meant I was no longer the man I used to be. That marriage was over. The sweet illusions of fatherhood had shattered in an instant. The child I called my son would always be tangled in my memory. I'd love him, but I could no longer pretend we shared blood or an unbreakable bond. Everything was fractured. I thought about the knife. How easy it would be to pick it up, press the tip to my chest, end this crippling pain once and for all. But the more I considered it, the more I realized I had a choice. Give in to that darkness or keep going. I remembered how, on some of Amanda's best days, she'd said she admired my strength. Well, that strength was all I had left. If I caved now, I'd let her betrayal define me. No, the blade would stay in the drawer. I would endure. I rose from the chair, ignoring the twisting ache in my shoulder. Maybe a run, ironically, would clear my head. Something to physically exhaust me so I could actually sleep. I grabbed an old pair of sneakers, paused in the hallway as the overhead light flickered once more. That flicker made me think of all the nights I heard her voice whispering to Eric Donovan. All the times she told me half-truths. Now the house was dark and silent, and she was gone. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The Arizona heat slammed into me like a furnace. Out on the driveway, there was no sign of her, just the faded marks where she must have pulled her suitcase. Good. I started jogging down the street, ignoring the throb in my chest. Every step pounded out the rage, the regret, the sorrow. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Then I circled back. The empty house loomed, but it was mine. And that was something. Inside, the living room was dim, the sun drifting across the windows. I kicked off my shoes, peeled out of my sweaty shirt, letting the dryness of the air sting my skin. I stumbled to the bathroom, turned on the shower, Hot water cascaded over me, scalding. And in that moment, for the first time since I shut the door on Amanda, I let the tears come. Silent, unstoppable. My body shook with them, but there was no sound. No wailing or sobbing. Just water and tears. Physical pain in my shoulder flared. A deep knot that pulled me forward until my forehead pressed against the slick tile. I stood like that for a long time, letting both the scalding water and the ache in my muscles anchor me in the present. Eventually, I turned off the tap, stepped out into the humid, foggy bathroom. I looked in the mirror, saw a man with bloodshot eyes, hair plastered to his forehead, a bruise of exhaustion under each eye. My chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. I wanted to say something to my reflection, to reassure him that he'd be okay. But I had no words. I just stared, my mind replaying the moment I confronted Amanda with the folder of evidence, her face twisted in guilt. Over and over. That night, I tried to sleep in our bedroom. The bed was too big. The sheets still smelled faintly of her shampoo. I stripped them off, tossed them into the hamper, and lay on the bare mattress. I closed my eyes. Every time I started to drift, I pictured Eric Donovan's face, or I heard Amanda's gasp of pleasure in some memory that wasn't meant for me. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. After 2 hours of that, I gave up, wandered into the living room, collapsed on the couch, and stared at the wall. By morning, sunlight bulled in through the blinds. I made coffee. The house was so quiet that the drip of the machine sounded unnaturally loud. My entire left side ached. I rummaged in a drawer for aspirin, swallowed 2 pills with a gulp of black coffee. Then I found myself chuckling bitterly. "Congratulations," I muttered to the empty space. "You're officially living in your own personal hell, Chris." My phone vibrated. A text from Amanda. "I can't believe you did this. I have nowhere to go. Please talk to me." I closed the phone without replying. I considered blocking her, but couldn't bring myself to do it yet. Not sure why. Maybe a part of me still felt obligated. Maybe that was the father in me, the man who thought he had a child with her, trying to be responsible. But no, I gritted my teeth and turned off the phone entirely. The next week was a blur of phone calls, half of which I ignored. Amanda tried texting me, emailing me, leaving voicemails. She cried, pleaded, cursed. It was like going through every stage of grief in fast forward. My parents called, worried about me. I told them I was fine. Another lie. Work was a struggle. I found myself zoning out in front of my computer, eyes drifting over logos and ad layouts without really processing them. My boss asked if everything was okay, and I forced a nod. My chest felt heavier each day, but I refused to break down in front of anyone. Then one evening, I found myself in the kitchen again, noticing how the sun caught specks of dust in the air. For the first time since Amanda left, I sensed the house breathing differently, like a wound that was finally beginning to scab over. Time, I realized, doesn't heal. It erases. It erases the comforting illusions I once had, the illusions that we were an unbreakable couple, that I was a father, that trust was unshakable. I turned on my phone. There was a text from her that read simply, "I can't do this anymore." My heart skipped a beat. Did she mean living without me, or something else? I wrestled with the urge to call, but I knew that road led nowhere good. So I put the phone down, walked outside to the backyard, where the desert sky burned orange as the sun sank below the horizon. I let the colors wash over me, trying to feel something like hope. As I stood there, I thought about the vow I wrote. I will not allow a second person in my marriage again. Never. I clung to those words like a life raft, reminding myself that I chose not to become a victim, not to share my life with an interloper. Amanda had made her choice. Now I had made mine. A few days later, she turned up unannounced. I heard the car door slam and looked through the window to see her standing on the porch, suitcase in hand. My stomach twisted. I stepped outside, blocked her path. She looked pale, hair disheveled, like she hadn't slept. The sight tugged at something deep in me, but I held firm. "Chris," she murmured, "I'm begging you." I crossed my arms, ignoring the twinge of pain in my shoulder. "Don't." "You were right," she said, voice trembling. "I was selfish, and I destroyed everything. But we can't just throw it all away." "That's exactly what we're doing," I answered. Then I pointed to the sidewalk. "Take your suitcase and go." She placed a hand on my forearm, but I pulled back. She swallowed, tears brimming. The squeak of cicadas and the relentless Arizona heat pressed in on us. "Goodbye," I said quietly, stepping back into the house. She tried to follow, but I shut the door, locked it. I heard her ragged sob through the wood, heard her footsteps stumble away. And so, this is how it ends, with me in an empty home, staring at an old scorched sink where I burn my silent screams, with my shoulders still aching from the tension of clenching my rage for too long, with a vow that I would never again let betrayal root itself in my life. It ends with a kind of relief, a savage satisfaction, knowing I closed the door on her, that I refused to share my world with a woman who gave herself to another man. I glance at the kitchen knife sometimes. It's still in the top drawer, gleaming with a dull menace. But I don't pick it up, not anymore, because my life, scarred, broken, and humiliated as it is, still belongs to me. And if I learned anything from this fiasco, it's that I can keep going, no matter how deep the wounds. The physical pain that lances my body is real, but so is my will to survive. Amanda Jacobs is gone, but the memory of who I was before her will never be the same. A part of me might always wonder what life could have been had she been faithful, had I not been so oblivious. But time erases. Someday, the details will blur, the pain will recede to a dull ache, and these days will become a shadow on my past. Yet for now, I stay here, alone in the quiet, stepping into a tomorrow without her. The walls don't suffocate me anymore. The clock still ticks, measuring out my future, and I remain standing, battered but unbroken. That will have to be enough.